All right. Hello and good morning again, everyone. Welcome to the early morning roundtable. This is our chance each week to have a little more freewheeling, excuse me, a little more freewheeling discussion on some the most pressing topics of the week. And with that, I want to welcome the team back and including Max. Max, I don't know if you can see the comments here. Great to see you. You said you've been battling raccoons on your farm most recently.
Yeah, I've been in on again, off again insurgency against raccoons and a family of foxes that has ravaged my homestead. I'm going to try and take a break from that and join the FO team here just for my own sanity, and hopefully the foxes and raccoons won't take over too much now that the growing season's over, and I can do something fun like play conflict analyst with you guys and talk about all the crazy stuff that's happening both in the country and globally right now.
Yes. Well, there is a lot going on. And on that topic, I know you're pressed for time this morning, so we'll front load discussions with you. The first thing is I want to get your take on this DoD directive. So this is 5240.01, and the title of this again is DoD intelligence and intelligence related activities and defense intelligence component assistance to law enforcement agencies and other civil authorities. And just reading through here, it talks about Title 10. It talks about Title 50. Title 10 is the overt, regular, big Army stuff. Title 50 is clandestine and covert. Those activities are authorized on U.S. soil. They always have been via president authorization. So you've read through this. It looks like it's timed towards the election. It came out in late September. Just generally, is this a cause for concern for you? What do you make of this?
As far as a DoD directive, one thing people need to keep in mind, this is, it is a disturbing bit of news as you see it on social media. But there's always been military assistance to civil affairs in the U.S. And I actually think that Obama maybe reinforced that in the 2013 NDAA. But this is kind of one step farther in the up the escalation ladder. And it is concerning because these assets, DoD assets, both Title 10 and Title 50, which could incorporate other elements of the intelligence community, are really were never meant to operate domestically, and they could be misused in the coming election and any unrest, social unrest, or civil unrest following the election. And it's something we need to keep an eye on. I was a little bit shocked by it, but you got to remember something. A couple of months back, maybe six months back, the Biden administration started really talking up the threat that Trump and his supporters and basically anyone on the right, whether it's Catholics or school moms or PTA moms or whatever. I mean, if you were against the regime politically, then you were a threat to democracy. And that language, that wasn't just empty talk. When the president is standing up there saying that, when the Attorney General Merrick Garland is sitting there in front of the cameras saying, if you don't like what DOJ is doing, you're an extremist and a threat to democracy. When Lisa Monaco is giving press conferences demonizing half of the country, those words mean something. They mean something in Washington. And so behind the scenes, we probably have a lot more going on than we know. And those press conferences, those clips, the dark Biden thing from a ways back, those are signals to the regime supporters in Washington that, hey, yes, we are going full steam ahead with this effort to demonize the political opposition and to paint them as being fascist or extremist or whatever, in an effort to support our objective of remaining in power. So, is this ideal? No, it's not. But it's also not the end of the world. It's just something that we need to keep an eye on and understand what's happening, and probably take a much closer look at what may be happening behind the scenes.
Speaking of behind the scenes, it is a little concerning for me as well, for a couple of reasons. Number one, if we need, as Max stated, there's a thing called MACDIS, military assistance to civil disturbances. And this is where the military comes in. And a lot of times it's National Guard will come in and supplement security for law enforcement. But we're not talking about boots on ground type security. We're talking about intelligence collection, domestic surveillance intelligence collection. And so looking at this, this talks about defense intelligence. And so to me, this looks like DIA activities. And when we in Defense Intelligence Agency, this is a little bit concerning to me because we can really go down the rabbit hole with special access programs and these little offices and these facilities, and no one knows they exist except for a very small handful of people. They can be shielded from congressional oversight. You know, half this stuff, maybe even a president doesn't even actually understand what's happening here, you know, much less other leaders. And we have seen pretty routine government abuse of power, especially when it concerns bulk surveillance in the stuff that's going on through NDAA. And then previous to that, we talked, you know, PRISM and all of these bulk surveillance programs. Max, just in general, what's the risk here that these intelligence activities are not general security? We're going to make sure the Iranians are not operating on U.S. soil. We're going to make sure that we can stop a terrorist attack. We can make sure we can do whatever in aid of law enforcement. What's the risk here that this is actually something far more nefarious?
Mike, I think the risk is very high that this is directed solely against the political opposition or people in opposition to the regime. And it is something to be concerned about, because when you can leverage a lot of these special access programs that people don't really know about but are very, very dangerous. I mean, these are the same tools we used against terrorists overseas. The very same tools, the very same special access programs, the very same special mission units, the very same intelligence collection apparatus or mechanism. We use this against terrorists. They were beefed up and fortified in the global war on terror, and now they are being turned around onto Americans, and specifically the political opposition. I don't think anyone that is involved in what this new defense document states, this assistance to civil authorities. I don't think any of the units that are meant to be covered by this document are looking for Iranian terrorists or people slipping across the border who are on the terror watch list, or Hamas terrorists or anything like that. I think they're looking strictly at the political opposition to the regime.
I agree 100%. This is targeted towards post-election fallout, which I can see the case to be made that say we're doing this out of an abundance of caution just in case. But given the federal government's track record, it's very difficult for me to believe that this is not in relation to something potentially far worse here. All right. And I know you're pressed on time, so I do just have another couple of topics here for you. Just in general, on the election, what's your outlook? I'm not asking for a prediction here, but in general, what are your observations on the election? And
as far as the election goes, Trump has incredible support across the country. Now, that's not saying that Trump is going to win, because there is a very, very strong regime support network that wants to stay in power, and they control, the intelligence community. They control pretty much federal law enforcement agencies and the security state. And those are powerful tools that will be employed, to make sure the regime stays in power. Now, I think they'll try and keep that as light of a touch as possible, because it could have a negative effect and a backlash against the regime. So, but we'll see how it goes. I mean, I can't really call the election, or I won't even try and call the election, because there is so much behind the scenes that could impact what actually comes out after election day. And I'm not like an election denier or anything like that, but I'm saying there's a lot of shifty stuff going on right now that mirrors a lot of the shifty stuff that was going on in 2020. So either way, I think if Trump ends up on top, at the end of the election, you can expect to see organized violence from the left. If Harris ends up as the president after this election, of the elected president after this election, then you might see some scattered, isolated kind of right-wing civil disobedience, but the right is really not organized. They, like the left, I mean, they really have zero organization. So beyond, a couple of yahoos deciding to go down and do tire burnouts on the rainbow flag crosswalk, I just don't see a lot of threat from the right. But I definitely think that if Trump is elected, there will be a significant amount of violence from the left.
Mm-hmm. And then finally here, looking past the election through the end of 2024, not election related, what are some of the risks, or maybe what's the biggest risk that you see that you think we should also be focused on and be preparing for through the end of the year?
Well, I think this BBC report that came out this morning on the possibility, or they kind of present it more as a fact, that North Korea is about to commit up to 12,000 troops to the fight against Ukraine on the side of Russia. I think that's very disturbing, because that's, this is how world wars start. When other countries start jumping into the middle of a regional conflict, it escalates and grows into a world war scenario. And unfortunately, a lot of the, I don't want to be too too inflammatory about it, but a lot of the war hawks in America, this feeds right into what they wanted to do all along, which is to jump into the Ukraine conflict. Now, this could be Ukrainian intelligence agitprop that is being spread around and being reported in friendly media outlets like the BBC. But if it is true, if North Korea is committing a division-size element to fight for Russia in Ukraine, this is the start of something that could go south very quickly and involve a lot of American forces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen similar reports that say those North Korean soldiers are headed towards Vladivostok to undergo some kind of training, probably on maybe Russian military training, I guess. Also, head of U.S. Army Pacific, General Charles Flynn, said earlier this week, I believe he said that North Korean soldiers fighters were already in Ukraine, and maybe this was like an Advon party kind of early arrivals. Also, Ukrainian intelligence claimed to have killed some North Korean intelligence officers in an artillery strike. Yeah, maybe they're already there in limited numbers. What do you make of those reports, Max?
I think they're accurate. Up to a year and a half ago, we were seeing scattered reports of sightings of North Korean advisors or advanced party types, observers, if you want to call them that, and which would be normal ahead of a deployment of a division-sized force. And so I think this has been in the works for a while. I really don't think the U.S. intelligence community should have been surprised by this, given those reports, 24 months ago. So, yeah, it's a definite escalation going in the wrong direction as far as global conflict goes.
Mm-hmm. Certainly seems to be the case. All right. Well, Max, thanks for giving us a part of your morning. We'll try to get you back on in unofficial regular capacity on Friday. And safe travels. Have a good rest of your trip, and we'll hopefully see you next Friday.
That sounds good. Take care. I'll see you next Friday.
All right. Thanks, Max. All right. With that, let's go ahead and bring on the rest of the gang here. We front loaded Max so he could finish up. All right, guys. Welcome back here, and thanks for standing by. Let's get back to some other observations here about this DoD directive. We'll just kind of run through this again. Mark, previously we were talking about previous iterations of the national security strategy and the national defense strategy. I do want to focus in on this authorization of the use of lethal force, because this is mentioned in this latest DoD directive. It does say that that is one of the considerations before the SecDef gives approval to any kind of defense operations in support of law enforcement here. Lethality, or the potential need for the use of lethal force, is a requirement. It also does very explicitly say that defense personnel may be in situations where lethality is a potential there. Just in terms of, what are your thoughts on, is this new? Is this this new DOD directive? Is it explicitly authorizing use of force, lethal force, or is this something that we've seen for a while? Because Northcom, they have the mission of defending North America, and Northcom's, uh, I think, was it stood up back I think maybe after 9/11. I could be completely wrong there. I'm not that familiar with Northcom. However, they do exist. They are tasked with the defense of North America. Have they had this authorization previously, Mark, or do you think?
Not that I've seen. As Max identified, there's been a lot of collaboration between civilian authorities and with the DoD. That's not new. This language, though, about having to explicitly delve into lethal force, talking about imminent threats. I mean, my takeaway is that it sounds very much like, if you are posed with a threat to your life, limb, or eyesight, or something like that, that you might have the ability, if it's an imminent threat, you'll have the ability to respond accordingly if you're attached or working alongside these civilian components that are being threatened. That does sound kind of new to me. I mean, we've been seeing some of this, these considerations floated around in other reports with other agencies. And so I'm not surprised to see that this is being addressed. I don't know how much of a step it is, because, to me, as I look through the literature on this, as we look through different directives, it looks like it's mostly a gradual step process as we're moving up. So it's not a major leap, but it is a step up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say this is an escalation. And by the way, this report, we've been combing through it. It's 22 pages, including the glossary and all that stuff. And it's 22 pages of like Army defense speak and legalese and all these directives. And it's very, very difficult to read. And unless you have some kind of prior experience with some of this stuff, you really can't piece it together. That's why I haven't made a lot of the media coverage of this, especially freaking out about the use of lethal force being authorized. And just a large part of this, Robert, I want to get your take, and Jared too. A large part of this is talking about the compliance issues, all these intelligence gathering activities, whether it's under Title 10 or Title 50. Again, Title 50 is your covert and clandestine activities authorized by the president. And this is clearly saying this could be authorized on U.S. soil. It is a question of, are they going after Hezbollah and Hamas or foreign states, China, Russia, North Korea, whoever else, Al-Qaeda, whoever else you want to throw in there, or if they're going after an expanded target set potentially of political dissidents, people that they fear may become violent. That really is like the biggest question that I have, the biggest thing that stood out to me. It is very obviously published targeting the post-election fallout. Robert, did anything else in this report really stand out to you, in this directive rather?
Yeah, I think people are getting really hung up on the lethal force language, but to me it read like, not that the DoD is authorized to use lethal force, but that the DoD authority has to consider that when they approve any cooperation with law enforcement. And there are historical examples of DoD and law enforcement cooperation, including the Waco siege in Texas. And then the exigent circumstances. So they also talk about exigent circumstances, and that's when you're talking about personnel having life and limb in danger and being able to defend themselves. On the broader topic of who this is going to be used against, I think I lean towards it being more towards domestic political dissidents, because that has been a major topic for DHS and federal law enforcement since the middle of the GWAT. I remember coming back from Iraq and Kuwait in 2012, and that was when a lot of the DHS language about the danger of radicalized GWAT veterans was coming out. And so to me, I think that's really what this is about, especially considering the timing of the election, that, they're worried about self-radicalized or groups of political dissidents doing something.
Mm-hmm. Jared, Mark, remind me to come back to you on this last topic. Jared, did anything stand out from your perspective as a Navy guy?
No, it all seemed pretty well in line with what I expected. At one point, they did reference the directive for arming and use of force, which we had to be familiar with, standing watch here in the U.S. And the one thing that stood out to me at all for the operation is that the Undersecretary of Defense is in charge of this of the operations under this directive, but the actual authorization of lethal force had to go to the Secretary of Defense, so his boss, like the guy who would actually have to authorize this, theoretically wouldn't even be really paying close attention to the operations, at least in a normal sense. He probably would pay attention to it somewhat, but it doesn't seem like it would be an immediate authorization to go forth and shoot.
Mm-hmm. All right, Mark, you came from group. I want to pitch this over to you. So I think the big risk here is that it is targeting Trump supporters, essentially, in anticipation that some Trump supporters will react violently to the election loss. I kind of on the other side here, I want to focus on the Title 50 stuff, so the covert clandestine stuff. What do you think is the case? And let me just play devil's advocate here. What do you think is the case that they are enabling some of these units operating under Title 50, so special missions units, the very highly classified programs, JSOC, et cetera? Could there be a case that they're going to let some of these special missions units go after what are very obviously foreign special operations and intelligence teams who have infiltrated the United States through a borderless border that we have? I'm getting black pills everywhere. Is there a white pill there that they're going to send some of these teams after foreign sabotage teams that have infiltrated the United States?
I think there's always a possibility. But at the same time, we've looked at this administration as having a strategy for countering domestic terrorism and domestic extremism. This means that they are collaborating with all government agencies, all state entities, and even foreign governments. And so this nexus between government, between private entities, between different kinds of different various law enforcement, to focus on domestic extremism and terrorism, what that tells me is that this is going to be hard coded into most of our federal law enforcement and our intelligence agencies. And so that would also include a lot of these other groups and organizations that do more of the covert and clandestine. So I don't see anything. Obviously, this is going to be very hard to track. It's going to be difficult to monitor, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. This is becoming part of the mission set. We now have a national strategy for countering these things. And so that means that we're orienting towards that. And so even if maybe you have qualms with that, even if Congress starts to, investigate and ask questions, this is now doctrine. And so I definitely think that the likelihood is high.
Mm-hmm. Now, just looking at some of these units, these are tier one, highly professional, the best of the best. They have their own selection. They have their own training program. It's very difficult to actually get into these units. And so we're dealing with, again, highly professional people. One of my first thoughts is, if this is extra legal, extra constitutional, if there is something there, we have heard in the past from whistleblowers. And Mark, before we move on, do you expect that we could see potential whistleblowers that said, maybe after the election, say, I was a part of this program, we did something that I thought was illegal, and I'm spilling my guts now to Congress because laws were violated? Is that a potential?
No, absolutely is. You take an issue like torture. So those of us who lived through the Bush administration remember that torture became a major issue for the Obama administration. There were a few whistleblowers, people that had qualms with it. Once Obama was elected, though, there was an effort to try to uncover, the so-called crimes of the Bush administration dealing with things like torture, rendition. That's when you really see the shift. Most people are going to act when they feel safe. And so if, let's say, Trump gets elected, let's say he starts to kind of do similar things that Obama did to try to, kind of move past some of the things that had happened under the past administration, pull people more towards his side within the administration, we could very well see a lot of whistleblowers who finally feel safe, that finally feel encouraged to speak out. And so if you see these organizational changes taking place with a new administration, it's a perfect opportunity for whistleblowers. So absolutely think that that's a possibility.
Mm-hmm. All right. All right, thanks for that, guys. Let's go ahead and move on to the election. I've previously stated my expectation. If we have a free and fair election and it were held today, I think Trump would win, and he may even win handily. Robert, we'll start with you as our main political guy. You've looked at the poll numbers. You're, for whatever they're worth. And again, we're in a situation where individual actors or a small group of people can have a much larger impact. A small group of people could potentially determine the outcome of a state election. And that's before we get to the courts and the Supreme Court here. What are your general observations and expectations about election day coming? And I say election day, it's not even election day. It's like days or weeks after election day.
I think right now, like you said, if the election was held today and there were no irregularities, Trump would win. Because I'm looking at all this polling in swing states, and Trump is edging out Harris. I think there's a couple reasons for that. The main one is one we talked about today, the polling on tariffs, and I think that reveals that the underlying current here is, the general wisdom of it's the economy, stupid. Like people are so much more worried about economic issues than they are about other ones. And there was actually some insider talk from Democratic operators in Arizona saying that they were concerned about how Harris is going to fare in Arizona as a swing state, because they're talking to people who are like, yeah, we support abortion, which is the number one issue for the Democratic campaign right now, but they're still going to vote for Trump. And that's scaring a lot of pollsters and canvassers in the Democratic Party. So I think generally Trump is probably in the best position possible to win. And as we get close, I think that probably the delay in knowing the results is a major issue once we get to the election day, because then you start seeing, I think we would expect to see more people lose faith in elections, which is a running theme over the last 4 years, where even Biden voters in 2020 thought that there were some irregularities and illegitimacy with the 2020 election.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just briefly too, you look at those bellwether counties, and it's something like 19 bellwether counties have determined, they have voted, they have gone the way of the eventual presidential victor in every election since 1980. And Trump won 18 of 19 counties in the 2020 election, and Biden won the general election. I have this long list of all these irregularities, and if one trend gets invalidated or there's one shift, okay, I can see. But we're talking about a handful of previously very reliable indicators. I've seen guys like Nate Silver try to explain, well, the country has demographically shifted rapidly from 2016 to 2020, and people are moving. And so, of course, we're going to break some of these trends. I'm going to be paying very close attention to seeing what happens with those trends in 2024. And maybe actually let's probably tag team that. Jared, your general observations.
Pretty much in line as far as free and fair elections going. My biggest concern, though, I remember hearing a congressman come out and say, "Oh, well, we should just not certify the results if Trump wins."
Mm-hmm.
I think we reported on that, but that sticks with me. I don't know if that conversation has gone any further, if that's gained any ground. If it has, I'd be very concerned.
Yeah, Robert did. So this is the essentially, if I guess the most dangerous, not most dangerous, but one of the worst case scenarios I think can happen is Democrats do take the House. They are seated before the certification. And Robert, you've reported on this extensively. It's that guy, his dad was a communist.
Jimmy Raskin.
Yeah. Okay. It's Raskin and it's Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And they have very clearly stated they're going to push a bill through to what they're going to label. They say they're going to label officially Donald Trump as an insurrectionist, and that would invalidate his certification process. Is that correct?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. All right. I don't expect that if the House gets taken by the Democrats by a handful of seats. I mean, is it's going to be a party line thing, just like a bare majority, 135 votes going to do this? How does that work?
So with the bill, if they try to go that route, yeah, it's just a simple majority. However, in the Senate, they'd have to keep control of the Senate, or at least have Harris remain as the president of the Senate for the tiebreaker vote. And they'd have to there's a couple methods they could do, but they'd basically have to kill what's called the legislative filibuster, which requires 60 votes to actually get a bill passed, and they could take that to a simple majority. That's a possibility, and that's something Democrats have been talking about for a long time now, is killing that legislative filibuster. The other method, I've seen a lot of talk about blocking certification. That requires also a majority in both chambers in order for them to actually block certification and take that, that vote back to the House and Senate for president and vice president.
Let's talk about the rest of 2024. Let's say in this fairy tale princess world, we get through the election and it's not challenged and everyone can agree on a winner. Okay, yay. Robert, after that, what is the next biggest thing? What's the biggest risk you see happening through the rest of the year?
I think this organized crime, like foreign organized crime groups and cartel expansion in the United States is a big problem. Trinidad and all these other Venezuelan and South American crime groups that are taking over apartment buildings in Colorado and Texas. The reason why I think that's important is because that's if that is not addressed, that's a major factor in, I think, loss of legitimacy, especially for local and state governments. And that not just because of the crime and things like that happening, attacks on, well, I shouldn't say attacks, like thefts targeting, power infrastructure, where they're literally pulling power lines down or going after oil sites in Texas, but also just it I think will contribute to a larger perception of loss of legitimacy for governance at the local and state level.
Mm-hmm. And that is a concern because nature abhors a vacuum. And if there is some power vacuum, the risk is that someone who is not the government, who ostensibly is supposed to have a monopoly on the use of force, decides they're going to use force. And so, I agree. I think loss of legitimacy is a big, big risk. All right, Jared, what say you through 2024 biggest risks?
I think biggest risk right now is probably the North Korea-Ukraine situation, like Max was saying, just because there's a lot that can escalate with that very quickly, and we only have 2.5 months left. And if North Korea gets dragged into a war, their one ally is China. So I need to go double check to make sure to see if they have a mutual defense treaty. I would be concerned that if North Korea formally goes to war in any capacity, that China would get dragged into it.
Mm-hmm. So if this is a case where North Korea officially declares war on Ukraine, whether or not they do de facto or de jure, they will, if all this stuff goes through, they'll be at war with Ukraine. All right, Mark, rest of 2024, what say you?
Yeah, I think the biggest risk right now is going to be what happens with these immigrant groups. I mean, we have millions of foreign people in this country. They're not vetted. Everything that we've learned over the 20 years of war tell us that there's going to be a heightened risk there. I'm really curious to see how this plays out, not just politically, but the national security concerns. I think that the tip of the iceberg is really this Trinidad and some of these other groups. I mean, we know that cartels operate in 50 states. They might not go full kinetic. They might kind of do a soft touch because they know what they're doing and they're careful. But at the same time, I mean, this is a real problem. It's not really being addressed. And I do think that there are going to be some ramifications there. The only other thing I'd say for 2024 outside the United States that I'm really interested in is I'm really interested to see how the rebalancing of the Middle East happens. We really have this strategic problem where we have the Arab world is kind of in the Middle East, is united against Iran. And so this rebalancing is going to be very painful. What's happening in Israel right now will absolutely impact that. And whether we would like to stay away or get involved, we're going to have to address it somehow. Washington calls the shots in the Middle East. So I'm going to be watching that pretty closely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've also noticed that China is getting involved a little more diplomatically with Israel. We've seen China try to be a peacemaker. They brokered the peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, for instance, and that was a big pivot point because now all of a sudden China is acting as a world mediator. That's something that they have not done previously. They're undermining the U.S. position there. I would say my biggest thing is I'm keeping an eye on these pro-Palestine groups, and they've kind of morphed. They've kind of morphed into accusing Israel of committing genocide in Gaza and Greater Palestine, and now Lebanon. it looks like that's going to. I guess the big risk here is it's only peripherally related to the election, but if Trump does win, he's pro-Israel. He says we're gonna arm Israel even harder. And these groups they've been saying stuff like, oh, we need to bring the war home. We need to build a Palestine resistance organization in the United States. And so I think if a Trump administration does more greatly enable Israel, the thing is, the Biden administration, they have at least kind of played lip service. I mean, the Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, and Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, they had this leaked memo earlier this week that said, Israel, you better cut it out, or we're going to stop sending weapons to you. You better let the humanitarian aid through into Gaza, or we're gonna do something. I don't know how real that is. If that's just like trying to placate their base ahead of the election. The memo was leaked, which I think is just incredibly convenient. And so now we take that and reverse it with the Trump very adamantly saying, no, we support Israel going in and cleaning house and doing whatever they're going to do, which may include a little more than just fighting Hamas and Hezbollah. And then, of course, Trump is a war hawk I wouldn't say he's a war hawk. I would say he's more likely to respond to some of the stuff that Iran is doing. I mean, he killed Soleimani and, so on. And so I think the big risk is we actually do have these pro-Palestine groups say, look, our protests aren't working. The campus occupations aren't working. We're going and protesting outside of Lockheed and General Dynamics and Northrop and all these other defense contractors. And we're not making an impact on the weapon shipments, Maersk and Chase Bank and all these other places they've been protesting and vandalizing. And they say, well, it's time to escalate. And maybe that is, I think the absolute worst case scenario is Trump gets elected and there's just like this kind of bitching and moaning that we see from the left, and maybe not, probably not a return to 2020 with just like nightly riots. There was obviously clearly going to be disruption. There's clearly going to be political violence post-election if Trump wins. But my biggest concern would be that Trump has this hardline stance on, I guess it's the end of the year. Trump won't take office till January here, but just looking ahead, early next year, if Trump does take a hardline stance against these pro-Palestine groups and overreacts, I think a Kent State type of thing. Trump has said he's going to invoke the Insurrection Act against these guys if they try to pop off like 2020 again. And so that is a case where, maybe we do have a return to 2020-like conditions if there is a Kent State or some kind of big Trump administration overreaction against these groups. That's particularly what I'm paying attention to. All right, and then let's end here on China. There's been a lot of speculation about 2027. We've heard from the Naval Chief of Operations a couple of weeks ago, instructing the Navy to be ready for a war with China by 2027. U.S. Army Pacific Commander General Charles Flynn reiterated that this week, basically saying, when Xi Jinping says 2027, I take him seriously. He's instructed the PLA. Xi has instructed the People's Liberation Army to be ready for military invasion of Taiwan by 2027. I don't know that is a directive. I don't know that that's a target date for an invasion, but that is a target date for being ready. And I don't know how true this is, but I've just seen some people have sent me messages and say, hey, I was talking to this guy. He's in the know. He's zoning in on 2027. This may be a case of kind of circular reporting here, but even before CNO came out and said 2027, Jared, we have been talking about 27 being the inside the beltway defense expectation. So the question is, there's been a lot of speculation about 2027. What do you make of that? Is that something we can take to the bank?
I think we can take to the bank that China will be ready for an invasion, but will be ready for military action by then, because that is the order, is ready for military action. So we may end up seeing blockade in 27, not invasion by 27. I'm going to end it there. Okay. I think that's what to watch out for.
Sure. Yeah, fair enough. And we can revisit this next, assuming we don't have something catastrophic to talk about next week. We can revisit this with Max as well. Max has got good take on this. Last question here. This is for any of you, maybe all three of you. The next question is, what changes this event happened, whether it's 27, I think it's very likely by the end of the decade. We do have a crisis or conflict. with China? How does this affect us domestically? We'll go Robert, Jared, Mark.
Yeah, cut off of imports, especially not just China. I think you've mentioned multiple times it's about 40% of imports of the United States, but also all supply chains around there, because we do import a lot from Vietnam, obviously Taiwan with chips. So
yeah, 40% of our imports come from the Indo-Pacific. Yes.
Yeah, and you're talking about everything from textiles to consumer electronics, auto parts. But I think on the bigger strategic picture, especially for the United States, that's chips, because the Biden administration, I think, had the right idea behind trying to reshore, especially advanced chip manufacturing here in the United States. But that doesn't seem to be really panning out yet. But that's a big one, because that affects all kinds of things, not just defense industry, but also automobiles. That was a big thing during COVID. You had a lot of these brand new vehicles rolling off the assembly line that were going right into parking lots because they didn't even have legacy chips to run windshield wipers. So then you'll start seeing this hitting a lot more industries, not just consumers.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, great take. Lots of disruption there, Jared.
The main thing I'm going to watch out for there is just really Chinese action inside of the United States. We know that we're bringing in 100,000 student visas every single year. There's about 300,000 students here. In total, there's the 2.2, I think it was 2.2 million CCP agents that were registered. That was revealed a couple of years ago. And then I was reading a book a couple months ago about China's secret army, and they were finding people that had not lived in China for 100 years that still decided, well, no, I have far more loyalty to China than the country that's hosting me because I'm Chinese. So I'd be very concerned about that, and that there has to be at some point a government response during a war. What that looks like, there's the historical example from World War II, but I don't know if that will actually, I don't think there's political capital for that. There's so much potential for action and sabotage and really shutting down the U.S.'s internal networks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, huge risk. Mark?
Yeah, great comments here. I think my big takeaway for China, where I'm really focused on, is the economic picture and diplomatic. We've seen that this last administration has kind of pushed China into Russia's arms, and into that sphere. Obviously, China and the United States are still incredibly interlinked. I think that's why, as Robert was talking about supply chain concerns, that's a major concern if we start to have more tensions with China and a potential conflict. But diplomatically, I'm curious to see what China will do, as it seems to be moving more in the direction of these BRICS countries, as it seems to cozy up a lot more with Russia. If we'll see a major problem eventually emerge there in a strategic way, because there is such an there's so much economic interdependency right now. And with China having certain problems, like with the plummeting birth rates, we saw some issues with their financial and monetary problems that come about, and it's kind of expressing themselves through their real estate market and so on. I mean, these are real problems that China knows it has to address if it wants to reach its national priorities. I don't know where the United States will always fit into that picture. I think in the past it was believed that, we're inseparable. We can't really disentangle. But as we've seen China kind of start to move out and cozy up with other parts of the world and be more open and explicit about that, I think that's going to be a major concern. And we could really see ourselves pitted against China in the long term.
Mm-hmm. Something that these are all great answers, and I'll finish up here. Something that has not been mentioned is oil. We have starting with Obama and continuing through with Biden, we've had this huge shift of we're going to move away from oil and gas, and we're going to live in this green utopic future. And I think there's a very good chance this president has to deal with this war with China. And if not, it's going to be post 2028. It's going to be one of the next two presidents. And so their energy policy is crucial. If we continue to see a drawdown of investment into oil and gas production. And again, it's not just production. Everyone says, oh, the United States is the world's largest producer, close or whatever we have been. It's refineries. It's oil refineries in the East Coast import substantial amounts of gasoline and diesel from foreign countries. That oil gets refined in India, it gets refined in China. Two of those countries at least one of those countries is going to be involved in a war, and maybe both. So I'm just looking at massive, massive problems with oil markets. And if we ramp up oil production, we build another refinery, we somehow increase refining capacity, whether that happens in the United States, whether that happens in Canada. The refinery is the crucial linchpin. Jeez, it's the crucial linchpin here for really the whole U.S. economy. All right. Well, everyone, hey, thanks so much to the team for an outstanding job they do every week. Thank you for watching this as well. That's going to do it for today's early warning roundtable. We'll be back on Friday. We're going to do this kind of freewheeling. People can talk about stuff they want to talk about. We'll have guided discussion on stuff. And of course, we'll finish up with your Q&A. And we will do this every Friday. And we will be back in your inboxes on Monday, back on the early warning briefing. Monday morning, 08 Central Time. Everyone have a great rest of your Friday, great weekend. And until next time, be well and stay out front.